Curry way downtown. Oh, what a shot from Curry!
The NBA draft is an extremely tricky process. You may notice here on my channel that I don't do too much talking about players that haven't seen a day in the NBA yet, and that's because you can't really tell what a player is going to be in the league regardless of what he's ever done in college. You have players that looked amazing in college who turn out to be no better than your average role player, and then you have players like Damian Lillard that went to small colleges that nobody was really talking about who turn out to be one of the top players in the league. So if I'm just a YouTuber who doesn't like predicting the future of college talent, then imagine what the struggle is like for NBA executives whose jobs may depend on it. Well, we all know there's been more than a few screw-ups when it comes to the draft, and that's what I'm here to discuss today. What's up NBA fans, Dom2K on the mic, and I'm not here to rehash the classic draft bust video because we're all pretty familiar with the players who did and didn't pan out and how it may have royally screwed a franchise for years. To be honest, I don't even know how to title this video without it being too long, but I'm here to talk about 7 times a team drafted a player and the star talent was actually the player right after what they selected, kind of like what's probably about to happen with the Knicks this year. I have the title worked out by the time the video releases. Now, there's 7 scenarios here, but I want you to know I picked this out of a possible 13 situations I was looking at. I narrowed it as much as I could to the most significant ones, and I also cut a couple because I know everyone knows about them and I just don't feel the need to beat a dead horse by analyzing them. The rest on my list of scenarios I felt I really had something interesting to say about, and I also felt they were a little less known, so without further ado, let's jump into it. Number 7. The 2011 Bucks. You know, you might say this one didn't actually turn out so bad for the Bucks or the player I'm going to talk about, and you'll see why in a moment. First, you probably remember Jimmy Fredette if you were around in 2011. He was that college shooting sensation that had everybody in the nation going wild. I didn't watch him personally at all because I watched zero college basketball as a kid, but even then I still knew all about him because that's how much hype was surrounding him. He was drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks, traded to the Kings on draft night, and almost immediately fizzled in terms of hype. He played for 4 teams in his career, struggled to find a stable home, and the most we hear of him now is that he's dominating foreign leagues. Meanwhile, the player chosen right after Fredette was Klay Thompson, who is now fresh off of a second NBA championship. He's already one of the greatest shooters in the history of the game. He's got an Olympic gold medal. Let's just say things turned out alright for Klay Thompson. Despite all of that, this isn't the royal screw up it might look like from the Bucks' perspective. Sure, they basically ended up with nothing as they traded for Sean Livingston and Steven Jackson, who didn't impact the team in any major way at the time, but it did keep them on the track that eventually landed them with what they have today, which is a team with amazing potential. I'm pretty sure they're happy with Giannis and Thon Maker, especially since Giannis might be the best player in the NBA one day, plus there's no telling if they would have been in position for Giannis had they selected Thompson here. Speaking of Thompson, he landed in the perfect spot with Golden State. 6 years later, literally all Thompson has to do is catch the ball, shoot it, and play defense. It's that much sweeter that he's played with Steph Curry and now Kevin Durant, meaning he's always been in position for beautiful looks. Now, if the Bucks would have taken him, would he have developed the same? Would he have been comfortable with ever putting the ball on the floor more? Does he get the same looks he's always had in Golden State? Who knows, but to the point we're at now, this mishap really worked out well for both sides. Number 6. The 2005 Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks seem to have been in no man's land for quite some time now. They've been good enough to continue to make the playoffs, but nowhere near good enough to compete for the Eastern title. Even in 2015 when they'd won 60 games, they still weren't even close to being as good as the Cleveland Cavaliers team with no Kevin Love and no healthy Kyrie Irving. Well, technically that's still better than where they were in 2005 when they were fresh off of a 13-win season. That's atrocious. This was a roster featuring Josh Childress, a 19-year-old Josh Smith, Al Harrington, and, well, basically nobody else you'd care to hear about. Well, at least heading into that draft they had Josh Smith, who seemed to have a large upside that of course he never fully reached, but then there's also the fact that they went on to trade for a disgruntled Joe Johnson in August who was unhappy with the Suns. Why is this significant? Oh, I don't know. I mean, they had the second pick in the draft that year with the perfect chance to add Chris Paul or Darren Williams. In any case, they would have been better off than what they ended up picking in Marvin Williams. It's not that he made such a bad pro, but it's that they picked him literally one spot ahead of Darren Williams, who was a terrific point guard up until 2012 or 2013, and Chris Paul went right behind him. Since Williams' career fizzled, we won't focus on him so much, but what if this Atlanta team had selected Chris Paul? Just so we're clear, not only is Paul still a top point guard 12 seasons later, he won Rookie of the Year that year with averages of 16.1 points, 7.8 assists, and 2.2 steals a game. The Hornets, who were 18-64 when they drafted him, were a 56-win team just 3 seasons later, making it to the second round of the playoffs. You might say Chris Paul hasn't won anything, and that's true, but there's no denying that he makes a team better, and he was a player that you could build around, but his best years were really toiled away in New Orleans. Had he been drafted to Atlanta in 05, he would have immediately been paired with Joe Johnson and Josh Smith. Were either of these guys as great as they could have been? Well, maybe Joe Johnson hit his ceiling, and I know Josh Smith didn't reach his full potential, but that's beside the point. Point is, I'm almost certain that would have been better than starting out with Rasul Butler and PJ Brown in the starting lineup, which is what Paul had to deal with. There's no telling what Chris Paul's career would have been like if he could have started with these Hawks instead, but if he was able to pull out 38 wins with the Hornets in his first year, I'll definitely try my luck with him next to Smith and Johnson as a rookie. Number 5, the 2012 Kings. You know, before landing in New Orleans next to the best power forward in the game, DeMarcus Cousins really was getting screwed a lot in terms of who he had to play with versus who he could have played with. The most notable situation that relates to this came in 2012 when the Kings lost out on the perfect chance to develop into a top team in the league fairly quickly, but in all fairness, any team might have missed this opportunity. The 2012 Kings already had Tyreke Evans at the point guard position along with Isaiah Thomas to back him up, who was averaging 25 minutes a game. Combine that with the fact that they had Fredette and Marcus Thornton as the two guards, and they had zero incentive to draft another guard. What they really needed was a power forward next to Cousins to complete the team, as Jason Thompson was just an average player. With that being the case, the Kings selected Thomas Robinson with the 5th pick, foregoing the opportunity to select Damian Lillard with that pick instead, who was picked right after him. I don't think I need to do too much explaining here. Lillard has routinely been a top point guard since the day he was drafted. Meanwhile, Thomas Robinson was traded in the same year he was drafted. Huge mistake on Sacramento's part, as they don't even have Cousins anymore because they never could put a good team around him to win, and a duo of Lillard and Cousins probably would have gotten the Kings to the playoffs, which they haven't seen in well over a decade. Although the Kings didn't have an incentive to draft a guard, they could have read the warning signs on Tyreke Evans' career and decided it was time to move on. Drafted in 2010, Evans won Rookie of the Year, was a very tall point guard, and looked like he had tremendous upside. That's good and all, except the fact that his numbers dropped literally every year that he played for the Kings, so by 2013, which was his last season with them anyways, it might have been a good time to let him go in favor of a new point guard in the draft. That could have been the start of something nice, but for what it's worth, I can see where the mistakes were made. Number 4, the 2010 Wolves. The basketball gods really kept giving the Wolves chances to make the most out of the amazing talent they've been gifted with Kevin Love. Unfortunately, the Wolves were always off by just one. Minnesota first passed on Curry by selecting Johnny Flynn in 2009, which is not on my list because that's one that's been analyzed to death already, but just a year later in the 2010 draft, they missed none other than DeMarcus Cousins by selecting Wesley Johnson with the 4th pick. This one should make you mad if you're a Wolves fan. You might look to tell me that you didn't need a center because you had Al Jefferson at the time, and okay, that's fair enough, except for the part where the Wolves traded Al Jefferson to the Jazz just a few weeks after the draft. The worst part, they traded him for Kosta Koufis. So now with Kevin Love taking the keys to Minnesota's franchise, he'd be sharing the paint with a player no better than a role player instead of DeMarcus Cousins, who would eventually become the best center in the NBA. This one would have helped the Wolves a lot because aside from injuries, the biggest problem of the Kevin Love era was actually building a solid team around him so he could take it somewhere. Well, he was drafted for the 2009 season, and the Wolves had two beautiful chances back-to-back in Curry and Cousins to skip the hard part where they'd have to trade to find a star to play with Love. But then again, the Wolves never have made a great reputation of getting their stars or supporting cast up until this year, so I guess it just kind of fits in with the trend at the time. Number 3, the 2009 Grizzlies. It turns out the 2009 draft was a good year for a couple of teams to really screw their futures, but in all fairness, this was an acceptable mistake by the Grizzlies. They simply just fit the criteria for this video. 4 of their 5 positions were already set. Their leading scorer was OJ Mayo. They had Rudy Gay, Mike Conley, and Gasol. The only thing they needed was another big man. Well, they were in luck because with the second pick in the draft, 7'3", 263-pound Hasheem Thabeet would be theirs for the taking. That sounded great and all in 2009, but you know what sounds a lot better in 2017? James Harden. The guy who just went head to head with the first player in decades to average a triple-double for the MVP award, one of the top 5 players in the league, and yeah, we all know who Harden is. At least the Grizzlies weren't the only team to suffer passing on Harden, seeing as how the Thunder looked the other way in 2013 as well, but this pick proved to be pretty costly for Memphis. Maybe it would have been a while before Harden got the chance to show Memphis his talent because he would have been a backup no matter how you cut it, but I'll still take my chances with that over the 3 points and 3 rebounds that Thabeet gave them as a rookie. The Grizzlies have suffered from that same no man lands effect that I mentioned with the Hawks earlier. Sure, they've been a good team and in some years they were a sleeper pick for the finals, but in reality they were always just one player away from truly being a championship team. I have no clue how they would have ended up building with James Harden as their guy, but I do know offense has been their main problem in most years where they couldn't get over the hump, and that's Harden's specialty. So yeah, that's probably a pick Memphis wishes they could get back. Number 2, the 2008 Grizzlies. Oh hey look, we're back in Memphis again. Yeah, it turns out Memphis had more than one chance to not be stuck in no man's land for all this time. This one is even worse than the last one because they actually picked the right guy and ended up trading him. So the Grizzlies still sucked in 2008 and wound up with the 5th pick in the draft after trading Pau Gasol to the Lakers. In that trade, they received the rights to Marc Gasol, which will be important in a minute considering Gasol turned out to be an amazing big man. With that 5th pick, Memphis made an amazing choice in selecting Kevin Love, seeing as how they just traded their star big man and all. Of course they screwed that up just a couple of hours after the draft by sending Kevin Love to the Timberwolves for OJ Mayo, who had been selected 3rd. Mayo turned out to be a pretty good scorer for a short time, but he never reached the heights Kevin Love did, who I think would still be considered a top player today if he wasn't a 3rd option in Cleveland. But that's not the worst part. A tandem of Kevin Love and Marc Gasol down low would have been an amazing pairing to develop for the future. On top of that, the Grizzlies already had Mike Conley and Rudy Gay at the time they drafted these two. So I know people feel like Rudy Gay had a higher ceiling than he actually reached, but Gay was still a good player back then. The Grizzlies could have moved on from 2008 with a core of Conley, Gay, Love, and Gasol. That doesn't sound like such a bad idea when you consider the Grizzlies were always missing that one guy like Love to get to the next level, not to mention him and Gasol's game would have ended up complementing each other beautifully. Both of them have become great passing big men. Gasol has a good mid-range shot while Love has expanded all the way out to the 3-point line. So yeah, for all the time that the Grizzlies just didn't seem to have it, well now we know why. Just a couple of different choices and it could have all changed. Number 1. The 2007 Blazers. So you likely already know who and what this one is about, so why did I not choose to cut this one along with Steph Curry to the Wolves and Carmelo Anthony to the Pistons? Well, because there's this huge myth floating around about the whole Kevin Durant Greg Oden draft choice, and I figured I could debunk it here instead of making a video of its own. So yes, we already know that the Blazers had the 1st pick and opted to take the big man over Kevin Durant 10 years later, and we can officially call that one of the all-time worst decisions, but most people give Portland leeway by saying it was the obvious choice to take Oden in 2007. Well, even if you truly think that, just consider all of this. First off, Kevin Durant's college career was superior to Oden's by any kind of measurement. Where Oden put up 15.7 points and 9.6 rebounds, Kevin Durant responded with 25.8 points and 11.1 rebounds. Not only did Durant average more than Oden in both categories, but he was a 6'9" ball handling forward who really had no ceiling as far as potential. How could you possibly go wrong with that? But that's not all. Many people say you can never plan for injuries, and that's true, but you can look out for the obvious red flags. KD didn't have any red flags for potential injury, whereas Oden had one leg that was shorter than the other one. Oh my lord, you're telling me a 7-foot, 250-pound center with uneven legs doesn't scream future knee injuries? Okay, well, for the purpose of this video, we can pretend that we can look past that. How about their love for the game though? Apparently Greg Oden admitted that he didn't really love the game all that much, and he even thought about being a dentist while he was in college. Meanwhile, basketball has consumed Durant's entire life. I even recall him talking about not wanting to sit out games because an NBA career is a short window where you need to play as much basketball as you possibly can. So at this point, I'm picking KD on common sense alone, but wait, there's still more. The draft workouts for Portland should have made this an easy decision. Portland's general manager called Durant's workout one of the greatest he'd ever seen in that building. Meanwhile, Greg Oden's workout was considered to be spotty. How was that not enough on top of everything else here to maybe reconsider Greg Oden as a sure thing? In every spot that Greg Oden came up short, Kevin Durant was the polar opposite, so in all honesty, nobody should be that surprised about where we are a decade later. To be honest, there's only one spot Oden had Durant beat in, and that's how he fit the Blazers. They already had Brandon Roy, who was the ball handling scorer, so perhaps they thought that they should go for the classic guard big man tandem to move into the future. It wasn't a bad idea, but it also wasn't a choice they were forced to make. See, the Celtics this year were sort of forced into finding a fit because Fultz and Thomas are both point guards who weren't going to coexist on the floor together at full potential. There would have been nothing wrong with having a great shooting guard and a great small forward who can really play a point forward though. It's not like they had to choose one or the other like Boston did. So yeah, just remember from now on, when Portland chose the quote-unquote sure thing in Greg Oden, it really was the safer choice for what their team needed. If you go through and tally up what I discussed, KD beat Oden 4-0 and definitely should have been picked first. And just so we're clear on who we're talking about here, the Portland Trailblazers are a second-time offender for the same exact thing. They chose Sam Bowie, who was an injury-prone big man, over Michael Jordan, so these mistakes don't seem to be that accidental. And that's all I got for you guys today. That was 7 times an NBA team selected basically a role player when they could have selected a star player with the very next pick. I don't doubt that in a year or two, we're probably going to be on this video looking in the comment section and people are going to be talking about how the Knicks passed up on Dennis Smith Jr. So yeah, we'll go ahead and save the A spot for him. Anyways, if you have any scenarios that you wanted to mention that I didn't talk about, make sure to leave that in the comment section. Obviously there was a lot more, but I wasn't about to go through all the NBA history. So yeah, just leave it in the comment section if there is one that you think about. Hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed. Make sure to hit the bell next to my name if you want notifications on my videos. And I'm Dom2K. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one.